Really, today's episode could have just been entitled, This Could Have Been an Email, and we could have just been done, right? We didn't have to do a whole podcast, if it could have just been an email. But good to see you, my friend. I know you've made some journeys around the world and back again, and you've decided to grace us with your presence back on the show.
It's funny because the superstar that is Jamie Hopkins actually invited me back to continue being a co-host, and I should feel honored. I mean, the guy's kicking the ball at the
Oof.
opening kick, which I didn't know was a thing, and watching Messi play from the sideline, which I'm jealous of.
Yeah,
But
nobody knew it was a
welcome
thing
back.
till I did it. It's
Well, look at
apparently
that
been a thing for
trailblazer, man.
years, and then I did it, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's a thing."
Yeah, you're a trailblazer. You're a trailblazer, and you're absolutely right. This could have been an email, but email, especially professional email, is the bane of my existence.
Hmm.
Mainly because people send way too many of them. And the worst is if you don't know if the email is truly addressed to you or if it's specifically meant to you, but everyone else is replying and they're replying to all. And then you're stuck in endless communication. And
Forever.
it is the worst.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so this is an interesting one, and when I asked you to hop on about this topic, I know you were like, I don't this one it is not the one I love, right? Like it's the bane of your existence. But the reality is so much of our communication in today's world has moved into this virtual world, and it's moved into email settings. And the reality is, most people are relatively new to it when we think about the grand scheme of the world, right? We've only really been emailing for 30 years or so. I think it was like maybe early 90s that email really started becoming a real thing. And when you think about that, okay, there's not decades and decades and hundreds of years of experience of what's the right etiquette. So it's kind of been developing as we go. And I'm sure that it will continue to develop past our conversation here. But I've had kind of the whole run. As when I was a professor, I got Miss Hopkins sometimes, and it was like, okay, if you're getting that wrong, there's a lot of stuff we have to talk about here. And it just kind of put people in a really bad spot immediately when interacting. So that's one of the things too, is like figure out who you're addressing. You and I actually have this as a funny story too, the way that your Gmail was set up. And I got your name wrong the first time because I thought it was Dr. Honey instead of, David Roney. That was an immediate thing that I got wrong when emailing you the first time.
Yeah, it's funny because you're not the first person to do it, right? And people do it all the time. But that's like a simple thing, and I've done it. I've made myself look completely ridiculous. I've sent emails in trying to connect people, and then either misspelled the
Mhm.
address, or I completely forgot the person. I'm like, okay, faux pas. Let's try this again. But I mean, it's as simple as that. I know in the business setting, people like to talk about the order that the recipient that is on there. To be honest, I don't really pay attention to that specifically because that is a lot of effort. I don't have a lot of time. And to be honest, I view email, and I take this from a former boss. Email is meant to not have things that need to be addressed immediately. These are things that need to be addressed like in the next couple of days, in the next week. If you have an immediate issue, it should not be communicated via email. And that's one of my major problems. I'm busy. I don't have time to sit there and monitor my email all day. And then the worst part is if you write me a 5-page letter dictating things, I'm never going to get all the details because I'm not going to read it. It's
Yeah.
just a reality. If you can't capture what you need to say in the first 3 lines, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah, and you started off with some good points, which is, and we're just going to kind of, I think go through a bunch of do's and don'ts here today on this topic, which is, make sure you're sending it to the right people. I mean, that's like super basic, but to your point, I don't know that the ordering matters as much anymore. I know that was a rule for a while, right? Like put the CEO or the top person up there first, and then kind of work through your list of people. I don't think it's as big of a deal anymore either. Like to your point, I don't check if I'm first, second, or third, or what order somebody put me on the list. that doesn't seem to matter. But make sure you send it to the right person. I think making sure you have a concise, kind of, header of your email too is important, right? What is the email title? Sometimes people send me ones without any, but it makes me not want to open them too, right? You just get the email with no subject line. You're like, well, that's probably the last one I'll ever open now, ever. Like, I also don't like it when people put it as important when it's just a general email and it's not super important. If it's important, to your point before, like pick up the phone and call. And I know that we were talking about that before, but what do you do, David, when you have something really important? And how do you communicate this in a professional way to somebody?
Yeah, the first thing I do, if it's really important, it's time sensitive, I give them a call. Or if it's very nuanced, I give them a call. If it's something that has a level of impact on the organization, I give them a call. And you see where this is going is I give people a call first. The email is just to summarize, or if I need to provide further evidence, or if they need to store the information for later and I need to transfer a file, then I send an email. Hey, this is just a follow up, quick email. Hey, this is just a follow up to the conversation we just had. Here's the documents I spoke of. Please let me know if there's any questions or concerns. Very respectfully, Dr. David Rumey. Very simple, man. I don't have time, and I'm assuming other people don't have time to sit there and trying to figure out what you're talking about. And when in reality, it could have just been a 5-minute conversation on the phone. Sending email is something like checking the regular mail. You should do that like maybe once per day, right? It shouldn't be something that you have to sit on all day. This isn't AOL Instant Messenger, and this isn't text messaging. Heck, if you really want something to be immediate, send me a text message. Easiest thing to do.
Yeah, what I will say is that that dynamic of your workplace might be different for different people. There are lots of jobs, I'd say, today where email really has become like instant messenger and immediacy work. It depends on the business line. Some business lines not going to be the case. There's going to be other systems, teams, and maybe an improved texting chat. Some companies use it more like a texting world. Now, again, I think you would put that in the do not do etiquette, but you do have to understand kind of how does the company function a little bit. The other one I'll throw out, though, as you kind of mentioned, is actually make sure you check. What I see over and over again, and this is FinServ Fellows, I'm talking directly to you, is actually you don't check your emails often enough. Things go weeks, months, and I hear this from your professors too, right? It's like we send emails and sometimes we get replies like 2 weeks after we ask for a reply back. And so that's important, right? And you do have to pay attention to time sensitivity of emails. Sometimes you decide, hey, I'm going to backburner this one. And I will sit emails sometimes for weeks without really going and maybe resolving the underlying thing. I will reply to somebody, but I use kind of like where I keep stuff unread as kind of my to-do list. So I'll go through, I respond, but I'll leave something as unread as kind of a task for myself. Now it depends on how I'm using email in different situations, but it's a way to use it. Not everybody uses it that way. But you should reply back. You should check it, at least once a day. And even if you can't write the whole response, it's, hey, I got your email, get back to you shortly. I got to check on a couple things. That's perfectly okay. But the kind of long sitting without replying to people, that can be harmful. You lose out on opportunities. And, some people take that, oddly enough, like very offensively. And they'll be like, hey, you didn't reach out to me. I emailed you already. And that happens too.
Yeah, I mean, so and my former boss had this down to a science, right? And I watched him do this. Now, he's very OCD and he knows he's very OCD, but every email that came in was categorized. Mm-hmm. He knew what area it came from, and then he would just go through and check that category. Now, if it's something that needed to be addressed in 24 hours, he would address it right then and there, but he would triage every email that came in at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. And he would put that as part of his like top 5 things to do. Mm-hmm. Now, for me, I do that as well. And I stole a little bit of that. I'm not as OCD as him, and where I have a rule set up to put everything in files and folders and go through that way. because I just get too many emails and I don't have enough time to do that. The interesting thing is that when I'm doing this stuff, I sort of, where did Jamie go? Are you back?
Mm-hmm. But there we go.
All right, I lost you for a couple minutes. The interesting thing when I'm doing my email is I put that every day as one of my top 5 things to accomplish. Like email, read the news, like those are always 2 of my top 5 things, right? Because those things are important to me.
Yep.
The email is important mainly because I know that I'm short on time and I don't want to miss anything. We reviewed an Indeed article, you and I, and one of the top like 22 things that they talk about is replying within 24 hours. I think in reality, I'm not a huge fan of receiving replies that just say thank you, right? Like that just bogs down my email, and I'm sitting there waiting for like some poignant like reply. Like you don't need to reply just to say thank you. And I've done that before too, and mainly it's because so that I can show the other person that I at least read it,
Mm-hmm.
and I acknowledge the fact that I need to do something. Now, if it's just a FYI, I'm not going to reply back to that. But if it's something
Yeah.
that's tasking me, I'll send something back and say, Roger, I got it. I'll take care of it by X, Y, and Z time. And I think that's an important thing to do. The reality is most people, like you said, they just don't have it in their routine to check their email. And that leads me to another thing. If you send me an email and it says bigwanker@gmail.com, I'm not opening that. It's just the reality. Have a professional email address. It's very simple, man. You're not 13 years old. Your username isn't supposed to be funny. It needs to be professional. And if it's not professional, guess what? It looks like spam to me, and I'm not opening it.
Yeah. And I'll drive on that one a little bit more is because I talked to a student just a couple weeks ago who said he's got 4 emails and he uses all 4. And I was like, you don't want to do that either. Don't have 4 different emails and spread stuff out that much. Like, pick one professional email that likely ties to your name in some shape or form, or a company, one of the two, and stick with that one. The reality is when you to your point, when you make up funny names, when you make up names that are maybe tied to superheroes or something else, again, that aspect of spam comes back up. And the reality is if you get emails that kind of sound funny from the sender, right? That it's, Batman's best friend 84. You're like, I don't think I'm going to respond to that one, right? Like, even if everything else seems legitimate, that is one factor that's going to reduce the likelihood somebody actually responds to your email. We talked about the other part before is just like, don't guess on people's names. Don't shorten stuff down before you know somebody too, or pick a Mr. or Mrs. if you don't know, or like take Dr. David Roney and be like, hey, Dave, how you doing? And,
You found another one of my pet peeves. And people do this all the time. And I'm going to call out advisors because they do it all the time. I don't know them. They're calling me David or Dave, and they're trying to solicit business from me or get me to hear their pitch. And I don't know you, right? The easiest thing to do in dealing with that, where you don't know a person, or even if you do, be respectful. Mr. Hopkins, right? Mr. Jamie, sir, ma'am. It's very simple. Or even if you don't know what title they like to go off of, good evening, good afternoon, to whom it may be of concern, right? There's certain salutations you should use. And that leads me to my next point. If you send me an email with an emoji in it, I'm not reading it. That's just the reality. It's not a serious email.
Come on, it's hieroglyphics, man. It's this ancient Egyptian, communication. This is
that they made a movie about with the poop emoji, right? Like I look, if you send me an email with an emoji in it, I'm just not reading it, right? You're just not being serious. And again, my time is precious.
Yeah. So, I think another one, and I know this happens to you too, is that emails are not a way for you to pass work off to somebody else, right? Like that's not what emails are. And, I still get things like that where people are like, "Hey, out of the blue, could you review this deck and give me some pointers on it?" And I'm like, "No, like it's not my job to review your pitch deck from some company that I don't work with and give you pointers on it." Now, if you reach out to me and ask for time and then say I want to run an idea by you, I will probably hop on a call with you and give you the time. But if you throw things over an email for me to do for you, those I usually won't respond to either. And I probably won't introduce you to anybody else again because you look like a taker to me then, right? Like you're not trying to give, give to give or anything like that. You're just trying to take. And you're trying to take from other people's time in an email and bark orders around. And I'm hugely not a fan of that. And that can occur inside of teams and other things too. It's just not the way that's not how you give somebody work, right? And be very wary of doing that to maybe people you report to or your boss reports to. Like, are you trying to send somebody work via an email when they're super busy? Just be careful about that. I think two other things too is we mentioned quickly the reply all. Just be careful with that at work. A lot of people reply all to company-wide messages. They're not meant to be reply all, so be careful. And the one that I've seen more damage done, honestly, even than that, is forwarding emails. I've ended up on forward chains where I was not supposed to see the rest of the email below. I've seen people in my organizations forward stuff out of the organization that shouldn't be forwarded out because when you scroll down, all of a sudden you see that they're talking about a client or they're talking about something that's more privileged information. So I try not to forward many emails at all ever unless I know I'm forwarding to somebody who wasn't on the email. But otherwise, I really don't use the forward feature. I'll drop like if you're trying to forward it because there's an interesting part, copy and paste it, move something over. The whole forwarding aspect of long emails can really get you in trouble, can hurt people, a whole bunch of things. So be very careful about using that feature in a professional setting.
I completely agree. Personally, if I'm ever in that situation and I need to forward a specific portion of the email, I do click the forward button, but I completely change the format of the email. I delete everything that they don't need to see,
Mhm.
and I take the forward part out of the subject line, right?
Yeah.
And then I put in there, I just shorthand it FYSA for your situational awareness, or hey, this is something that I think you need to know about. Please keep this for your information. But it's very important, and people do this all the time. And this gets us back to people who are tech savvy versus non-tech savvy. They don't realize that they're doing something wrong because a lot of people will just forward an email
Mhm.
chain and they never actually scroll to the bottom to see what the original conversation is. I forwarded or I've received emails where someone's talking negatively about me or another colleague of mine. And I'm like, well, was I supposed to see this? Because I see it now. And so
Yeah.
now I have to address it. And that is a problem, right? Like you have to be able to be professional in the way that you use email. Again, the whole purpose of email was to be electronic mail, right? To be a electronic version of what we call snail mail. You don't sit there and wait at the mailbox all day for your mail to come in. It's just not how it is. The post office delivers 6 days a week, one time a day, right? And the reality is we've taken email and we've turned it into some type of text messaging on steroids. Even text messages originally, most people don't realize, and unless you're of the olden days and you're getting older, that text messages had a character limit on it originally.
Mhm. Oh,
And if
yeah.
you had to pay by character, right? And then they took away the character limit. First, they added the ability to thread, and then they added the ability to not have a limit. It reminds me of Twitter, right? Twitter started out with however many characters, and then they expanded, and then eventually they found a way to do long form messaging on Twitter. And we've sort of turned email into super text messaging. And if you look at the format of a lot of emails or email clients, it's turned into where it almost looks like a text message thread. And
Mhm.
I feel like people have gotten so comfortable with that they're misusing it and it's becoming a problem.
Yeah. Look, I think that's why we're doing this episode, because there's so many things that can go wrong. Right? Like, it's misused, it's treated like a text chat. We forward messages we shouldn't. Some of the ones that are less harmful but always good takeaways too is like, make sure you put the right attachments on things. And I will tell a funny story about this one on my own pain, right? This is learnings from people who have messed up along their own way. So I was working for a political consulting company in Washington, D.C., and I was supposed to be writing an article for them for a speech of, I think, a governor that was around, kind of climate change. And so I'd never written anything else on climate change. And so I just, went on my computer when I was going to send the email, and I, started typing in climate change or whatever it was. And I saw a Word document. So I grabbed it, dropped it in the email, off it went. Mission accomplished. Great day. And I got a call from my boss at the time, and he's like, "What the hell is this? What did you just send over?" And I was like, "I sent over the article. What's wrong with it?" And so my best friend in college, Bijan, apparently on my computer one day, because this is very classic Bijan, just decided to write some literary thing. He was an English major, about arguing both sides of a topic on my computer. I don't know why he didn't use his computer, but he didn't. That's very Bijan. And so there was this like article on there that Bijan had wrote about like anti-climate change versus climate change. And like, that's what I sent instead. So I sent this totally terrible, like, email, basically arguing the other side of what I was supposed to be working on this whole time, not even my own work, because I didn't even know it was on the computer. But it was one of those moments where I was like, super embarrassed, horrified. And, I sent over the correct one right away. But it was one of those moments where it's like, yeah, you know what? You can click on the attachment and open it and check to make sure the right one is there. And I do that a lot more now than I used to, right? Is like just the right file, make sure it's the right one. Because sending an unfinished file or ones with notes in it or the wrong one like that in the right situation can be really harmful. Obviously, there's much worse versions of that out there. And I think one more I'll add, and then get some of your feedback is, as an attorney, I also tell people all the time, like, be careful of some of the things you're putting down into written form anywhere. There are times when you said before, David, that like you do want to put something down because you're summarizing it, you're putting it down in writing on purpose over to somebody. And that's a use of email sometimes. Hey, here's some things, I'm sending it to you, it's written down, you have it now. But on the flip side, there are times where you really do not want to put every thought that you have in your mind down on email or Teams or a text chat. And some of those are better off being phone calls or meetings in person with somebody. So, you definitely, I think as you're early on in your careers, you're not going to be as cognizant of that. Often those come up after some point in time when you had a problem with something. But this does plague people. It plagues executives, it plagues companies. Be careful of what you're putting down all the time in writing. If it's something that you don't want to be plastered on the front of the New York Times someday, it shouldn't be written down in an email.
100% agree. And I'm going to take it one step further. If it's something that you don't want the whole world to know and you don't want to ever be found, don't put it down in email, right? So if you're bad mouthing a colleague, and you should never do that, don't put it in an email. If you are saying anything wrong, or if it can be deemed in any other light, don't put it in an email. I'm just going to be, we all get emotional. We all have our bad days. Do not use email as your emotional outlet to send to other people.
Yeah.
It's just, don't use Teams, don't use text messages, just don't.
Yeah, especially if you're entering financial services, there's a lot of flag words out there too. So, things that compliance might have put in place or, kind of tech to flag, hey, so if you put bomb in something, it very well might get flagged and they pick it up and somebody then goes and reads it. Similar thing though, if you put down a coworker, or somebody in a message is putting down a coworker, some of those words could be ones that get flagged. Also, remember your company has the right to look at all of those things, right? Like it's theirs. It's their communications when you're working there too. So, especially on work emails, be very cognizant of that. But it's a great point. Like even in text messaging, I think a lot of us grew up at a time, you and I did, where our first 20 years of life or so, 16, really didn't have phones that recorded things at all. Really, as you said, like maybe we sent text, but it was mostly like, hey, mom, pick us up here because you don't want to use up call minutes or whatever. And, but that's changed a lot. So the whole world, all that stuff is fairly permanent and can cause a lot of problems. As much as these are great tools to use, thinking about the appropriate way to connect with somebody, keeping things short, clear, not having things that look like spam or some type of fraud. All of that has to come into play every time you email.
It's a great point that you brought up. 20 years ago, when we were in college, texting wasn't a thing, right? We called people.
Yeah.
And email, we were in college. I tried never to use my email, right? Because it was only associated with it was communication with my professors. It wasn't communication from one person, one student to another student. Is communication with our professors, or it was professional associated email. The biggest thing for us was AOL Instant Messenger or MSN Messenger, where we would talk to our friends. Now, people are so comfortable with technology, and I'm guilty of this too. I don't like talking on the phone, and so I text people all day. But the thing is we have to remember there's a clear distinction between your personal text and your email. And I think people have started to blur the lines. And as we get more and more of these tools, Slack, Teams, people think they treat it like their personal text, right? And so there's a lot of shorthand that is used. If you're using an acronym, spell it out first. Even if it's a well-known acronym, spell it out first. It's just a reality. That's the professional standard. Don't use acronyms. Don't make up acronyms that aren't standard. And if you're making up one, just because you're having to use that word over and over again or that phrase, you need to spell it out beforehand. It's the same things. And your email should take less than 30 seconds to read. If it takes more than 30 seconds, guess what? It's too long.
Yeah, all this is good, and I know it's maybe not the world's most exciting topic of all things that people hop on, but I really do hope everybody listens here and thinks about this as like a very serious part of their professional development and success. Bad emails, bad email etiquette can cost you business, raises, job opportunities. It can cost you introductions to other people, right? It can kind of get you pushed out to the side and people aren't going to help you. So it is really important. It can get you caught in lawsuits, all kinds of things. So I think, what Dr. David, you said earlier was like, if this isn't something you want the whole world to see, it shouldn't be that form or in that email. And so a lot of the things we're talking about are trying to keep that from happening, treating it professionally, being concise, short, clear, not looking like fraud, because email fraud's, growing and growing. It's going really basically out the roof all the time. And it's getting better and better, where typos used to be a clear giveaway, right? You could read it and be like, oh, well, that's clearly not, that prince is not a real prince. It's not the fact that it's a prince, but I don't know why princesses don't try to move their money here too. Haven't figured that out. It's always a prince, but you figure some of these princesses would want to transfer money to me in the U.S. also, but they still don't reach out. So
yeah, me either, man.
I know it's weird, but but email etiquette, professional communication, and I know we originally were going to go broader than this, but somehow we spent 30 minutes on email etiquette because it is that important. And I think it's it's a small part, but can be really damaging if done poorly throughout the course of your career.
Agreed. And guess what, folks? That's the episode for today. All about email etiquette.
Could have been an email.
Could have been an email.
All right. Thank you, my friend.
See you later.
Appreciate it.
Peace.